Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. So since the cost effectiveness tool was released late last year, we know that there's been a lot of questions. So although some housing associations, local authorities, property management companies have already begun this task, we know everyone's at different stages, and whatever stage you're at, you may be having a few questions. So Sycous have joined with Chirpy Heat today to provide an overview of the tool and then review some of the options and some of the processes you could take that's available in the market. At the end, we're going to have a Q&A, so please feel free to just drop your questions throughout. And I'm joined by two speakers today. So the first speaker will be Routh. He's the director and co-founder at Chirpy Heat, which is an independent consultancy specialising in advising non-profit heat network operators. So Chirpy Heat's primary focus is to help heat networks achieve their low carbon, low cost and low hassle potential and resolve the headaches they have created to date in the sector. So prior to establishing Chirpy Heat, Will worked in a social housing, energy and sustainability for 10 years, primarily as head of sustainability for a large housing association where he was directly responsible for a heat network portfolio of over 4,000 properties. So he can definitely relate to what you may be experiencing at the minute. And in 2018, he co-founded the Heat Network, which is a best practice sharing group for heat networks in housing associations. And in 2019, he co-created the Heat Exchanger, which is a mentoring program to help improve skills, professionalism and learning in the developing heat network sector. Following Will, we also have Martyn Farrelly. So Martyn is the Business Development Director at Sycous with over 25 years of experience in metering. So Martyn supports housing associations and local authorities and all heat networks to support with site-specific metering solutions and the ongoing monitoring and billing of the networks. And then finally, I'll come on at the end to talk to you about billing services. So I'm Odessa, part of the business development team at Sycous, and I work alongside Martyn for metering, billing and maintenance. So to begin, I'll pass you over to Will.
Thanks, Odessa, and good morning, everyone. It's good to see so much interest in heat network regulation. It's not the most sexy of topics, but I remember 2 years ago when I started a seminar about this and I was pretty much talking to myself, whereas today I think we've got over 50 people on the seminar. So times have changed in terms of heat networks and how important they're treated in housing associations and local authorities. So my job this morning is to provide an overview of the cost effectiveness tool, what you need to do, by when, and I need to make it both informative and interesting, which is not an easy task with regulation. So thanks, Odessa, for the intro. My name's Will Routh, and I'm director of co-founder of Chirpy Heat. Chirpy Heat is a heat network consultancy. Sorry, it's on the next slide, please, Tom. We're aiming to deliver great heat networks, both for housing providers, the environment, and for the residents that live in them. And we do that by being independent and impartial advisors to heat network operators, primarily working with housing associations and local authorities, which is the background of the three co-founders that between us we've worked on the client side for over 50 years. So we like to think that we kind of from the sector and for the sector. We work from a kind of a wide range of services, from the boardroom to the plant room, right from strategy and management, training, policy, compliance, communications, financial and procurement. Anything a heat network needs to do internally, hopefully we can provide support to your organisation. And since we were founded 2 years ago, we've got 25 housing association and local authority clients and are working across 2,000 heat network properties. So we've grown quite quickly, and the regulation has become a big part of our work over the last kind of 6 to 9 months. So next slide, please. So why are we here this morning? It's primarily to talk about the updates to the heat network metering and billing regulation, which were released towards the end of last year, so in November 2020. The regulations as a whole, they have 4 main obligations for heat suppliers that are outlined there. So firstly, it's to notify the Office of Product Safety and Standards if you operate a heat network. And you need to do that either every 4 years or as and when a new heat network comes online. Secondly, it's to install meters or heat cost allocators where it's feasible and cost effective to do so, so they can measure and display customer consumption. And that also includes installing temperature control and building level meters. And that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today. And then the ongoing obligations, 3 and 4, are around ensuring continuous and accurate operation of the meters, and then accurate and clear billing based on actual consumption in the long run. So today we're primarily going to be looking at number 2 on this slide, which is the re-release after a gap of about 5 years of the cost effectiveness tool, which helps organisations understand their duty to install meters, particularly on unmetered networks. The other big change to the regulations that came in towards the end of last year is the introduction of potential unlimited fines for non-compliance with heat network metering and billing regulation, which has certainly made the sector sit up and notice and to kind of take this more seriously. So I thought I'd start with the key compliance dates on the next slide. 3 key ones to remember, one of which is passed, so it's kind of 2 going forward. But on the 27th of November last year, which is when the updated regulations were released, and that is when the cost effectiveness tool was relaunched. So you must now comply with the cost effectiveness tool. So they've given, BEIS have given a year for compliance for cost effectiveness. So by the 27th of November 2021, all cost effectiveness determinations must be complete. So that's all networks that need to have a cost effectiveness determination must have been through the tool and understanding what needs to happen off the back of that. And then by the 1st of September 2022, those heat networks that need to have meters installed, so they've passed the cost effectiveness tool and it's been shown to be cost effective to install metering, they must have the metering installed by the 1st of September. So the headlines are just over 6 months for all the cost effectiveness determinations to be complete by the end of November this year, and then 15 months to get any installs complete for those that pass the tool. And depending on your organisation's level of exposure with unmetered heat networks, this is not really very far away, either 6 or 15 months. Meter retrofit programmes are not quick and they're not easy. They take a lot of time to get the right contractors in place, to undertake all the resident engagement. So really, my first kind of recommendation is not to underestimate the timescales on this compliance. So on the next slide, I thought I'd start with kind of which buildings do you need to assess. So the new updates regulations has created 3 classes of building, which helps organisations assess which heat networks they need to put through the tool. So the 3 different classes, they start with viable, which is where the installation of final customer meters is always mandatory. So for housing associations and local authorities, that's mainly going to be new heat networks, which since 2014, when the regulations were released, you need to put in final customer meters. The slight change to that is now anything that falls into the open or exempt class, which potentially will be supported housing, can go through the cost effectiveness tool. The second class is what's called the open class, which is where meters or heat cost allocators must be installed where it's cost effective to do so. So the open class are the buildings that you need to put through the cost effectiveness tool. And at broadest terms, it's the general needs schemes that don't currently have meters installed. And then also the new supported housing schemes that will be completed after September 2022, where you can undertake cost effectiveness determination at design stage. There's also an exempt class that recognises that in certain situations, in certain buildings and heat networks, it just won't be cost effectiveness to install metering or heat cost allocators. This will mainly be existing supported housing or where any buildings have leases that prevent metering based on individual consumption. So I thought I'd go a little bit more into the exemption because it does kind of almost determine the first step of what building you need to put through the cost effectiveness tool. So on the next slide, it kind of breaks down the kind of 4 main exemptions, which are supported social housing, arms houses accommodation, any purpose-built student accommodation you may have in your portfolio, and then anything where the lease provision prevents individual metering. And the big questions we get on the cost effectiveness tool determinations we're doing at the moment is, well, what counts as supported housing? The definition is a little bit loose, and that's largely because there isn't a legal definition of supported housing. It's usually self-defined by housing associations and housing providers, but that becomes self-policing because if it is supported housing, you are probably reporting it to the housing regulator. So what we recommend is if you report it to the housing regulator as any kind of supported accommodation, it also needs to be treated supported through this regulation as well. And it needs to be consistent across the two different sets of regulation. The kind of key indicators would be access to additional resident support, and that could be kind of wardens on site, either kind of permanent or kind of part-time, or peripatetic services that come onto site through part of the week, or any support alarm services for residents if they need to call for additional support. Other indicators might be age restrictions or communal areas that people share services. And then Bayes has provided some additional clarification around which types of schemes may fall into that, but that's any kind of schemes that provide emergency accommodation for the homeless or for people suffering from domestic abuse, or anything that has exclusive use for vulnerable groups, such as refugees, those leaving care, or offenders, or those with drug and alcohol issues. That definition, we'll share the links for that after the seminar, but the exemptions is almost the first stage you need to take, is actually which of our heat networks fall into the exempt class and which fall into the open class, and therefore need to go through the cost effectiveness tool. So what is the cost effectiveness tool on the next slide? At the most basic term, it's a spreadsheet or two versions of a spreadsheet that help calculate the payback period of installing meters and or heat cost allocators. And it sets this against the cost, the potential energy savings that will be gained by installing individual metering. The energy efficiency gains are assumed at 20% on domestic fuel bills by people having access to individual meter information. And this is based on studies from across Europe that shows that when individual metering is installed, you get that saving. And then it's a 10% saving for any commercial buildings that might be on that heat network. So the result of the tool is relatively simple. If the payback period is less than 10 years, the installation of meters is deemed to be cost effective and you need to install meters. If the payback period of the meters is more than 10 years, so the costs are not offset by the energy savings, if it's more than 10 years, it isn't deemed to be not cost effective and you don't need to install meters in that building. As I mentioned, there's two versions of the tool, the reduced input and the full input tool. And they're designed for different circumstances depending on the data availability of your organisation and of each individual heat network to provide some flexibility in approach. Use of either will count as compliant with regulation. There's not one that's more compliant than the other. So that is kind of one of the key decisions you'll need to make as part of the process. So on the next slide is kind of the most basic in simple terms, kind of how do you go about undertaking cost effectiveness tool, the process. So at the most basic, it's gathering the data that needs to go into the tools, inputting it into the tool you've chosen, even the full input or the reduced input, verifying the data that's gone into the tool, making sure it's accurate and it's been inputted into the correct parts of the tool. And then it throws out a determination. Is it true or is it false? Which is the terminology it uses for passing or failing the cost effectiveness tool. And then once you've got your determination, you need to decide what's the best course of action for your organisation on that heat network. However, I'm working in and for housing associations for the last 15 years. I know that anything involving data is not as simple as it sounds on paper or in this 5-stage diagram, and that it can take a lot more effort to get what might be seemingly simple data. So I thought that would be a good place to start. What data is required for each of the tools on the next slide. And this is kind of headline side of things. There's detail below that, but I thought I'd just provide a bit of information. So the reduced input tool is designed for where you have access to the building details, so the age, the location, and the number of units in that building. And then where you have fuel consumption data, so you know the type of fuel you're using, how much is used, and the price that's paid for that fuel. And then the additional information that's key using the reduced input tool is actually getting prices and quotes for installing heat meters, the payment meters, or the communication. You need to get the information out of the building to allow a metering service to take place, or heat cost allocators if that's the alternative. And then a little bit of information around heating controls and the number of radiators in the building. The full input tool is designed for where organisations don't have accurate or any consumption data for the building. So it requires a lot more information around the kind of construction type to understand how much energy would be used and what will be lost as kind of inefficiencies in that heat network. So it's looking at construction type of the walls, the roof, the floors and the windows, including the U values of those parts of the building. And then detailed information about the heating equipment. So what fuels used, the size of the boilers or the heating equipment, the efficiency of that, and then the number of air changes and the external wall parameters. And the tool builds up a kind of model of that building to understand how much heat will be consumed, how much heat will be lost, to understand that energy efficiency payback, to see if the cost of the meters will be payback in 10 years or more. So you've got hold of the information for either of those tools, which is going to require a lot of chasing down information internally from asset management databases, from utility providers. Kind of what happens at the next set slide will give you a bit of information what happens next. So import that information, and then the tool throws out a determination of you need to install meters. It is cost effective to do so. So that means that you need to install the meters or heat cost allocators by the 1st of September 2022. So after that point, your organisation needs to get the budget to install those meters. It needs to procure a meter install partner and a metering and billing contractor to provide the two services of actually getting the meters installed and retrofitted into the property, and then providing the metering service ongoing from that. So they need to be procured, appointed and mobilised, and then a programme of works to install the meters, and the resident engagement around what needs to happen and why it needs to happen. And my biggest advice of running several meter retrofit projects is really don't underestimate the time that all of that left-hand box will take. In 15 months, it's going to be a lot to achieve across a portfolio of buildings in your stock. So really, yeah, key recommendation is to start early, and if you have a number of schemes that are determined as cost effective, is to really pilot and trial some installs this year, so in 2021, so you can learn, understand, find your partner contractors, and not leave it all to the summer of 2022, rushing up to that 1st of September deadline. If the determination in the tool is that it's not cost effective to do so, that's somewhat the end of the process, but there's a few key things that you need to be aware of. The evidence needs to be kept for an audit trail. You do not have to submit anything to BEIS or to the OPSS, but they can request to see it if they want to see further evidence. So they want to see the evidence of invoices for any fuel that's gone into the tool, so actual consumption data, any quotes that have been used to determine prices of meters going into the building. So that all needs to be kept in a secure and accessible location for any requests that come in. And then it needs to be kept under review. It's a kind of 4-year process that becomes linked to the notification process. So the OPSS notification return needs to be submitted on a 4-yearly cycle, at which point you need to update the building classes and any cost effectiveness determinations. And that's also linked to any major renovation work. So if there's any kind of major fabric or major plant upgrades in a building, you will have to do a cost effectiveness determination to say, actually, do we now need to put meters in at this point of the building? And then there is the question around, actually, should we install meters anyway, kind of voluntarily installing meters into the network for a number of purposes. So the energy efficiency payback may not reach that 10 years, but there's lots of other benefits to installing meters. The kind of carbon reduction agenda is quite big in housing associations and local authorities at the moment, and also using data to manage heat networks effectively from a customer service point of view and also a repairs and maintenance point of view. Installing meters throughout the network will allow much more advanced heat network management. So there may be other organisational drivers that you may choose to install heat meters into those buildings. So what are the kind of key considerations as a kind of recap that you need to understand for your kind of cost effectiveness tool journey? So the next slide gives a kind of overview of these. So the first one that I'll keep coming back to is the availability and accessibility of data. Do you have your previous OPSS return from 2019, or do you have a heat networks register? So do you understand what your portfolio of heat networks are? And do you have access to all the information that you need to then put into the tools? So the utility information, the asset management information, and then getting hold of the quotes for heat meters or for heat cost allocators. And then it's the decision around which version of the tool do you want to use. Is it the reduced input tool or the full input tool? And that bases on the data that you've got available. And then who's going to do it? So the roles and responsibilities, who's going to gather the data, who's going to input the data, who's going to go out to site if you need to go and collect more data, and then who's going to play that verification role of making sure the data going in is correct and it's giving you the right determination. And then the compliance process on the ongoing side is understanding actually we need to have an audit trail that is accessible, and you can meet your obligations going forward, and then integrating it into the organisation in terms of any review process, who does what by when. All of that requires organisational resource and potential cost to assess, to get the data, and then if it's determined, to install meters. So on the back of that, Chirpy Heat has designed a kind of flexible and kind of simple process to help organisations with this process. So if you don't have internal resource or need some external support, we can provide that for you. So the next slide sets out the kind of 4-stage process that we've put together. So the service is called Heat Assessor, and it's a flexible service. So you may need help with the whole journey or just parts of it. So stage 1, we can start and help you review your heat network portfolio, help with that building classification. Is it in the open, viable or exempt class? And then what data do you have available to help select the right tool to use? We can then undertake the assessment for you, collecting the data, putting the data into the tool, and then undertaking site surveys to get any data that may be needed from site. Or we can work with and train up people internally, any surveyors or caretakers or on-site staff, to get that information potentially in a quicker and cheaper way. We can work with your internal teams to say this is the information that's needed from certain sites. The assessment will be undertaken, and then we'll report back the outcomes, the determination. Does it need meters? Does it not need meters? What are your next steps across your heat network portfolio? And then at the end of the process, it's not absolutely needed, but we recommend that you then update and complete your OPSS notification with the building class and where you're going with that, so that that's kind of wrapped up that journey and that information is captured in the latest notification. And that can be submitted to the OPSS, so you're up to date and compliant both on the duty to install and the duty to notify. So if your organisation is interested in any of that support, please get in touch. And then if there's any questions that you want to talk about that, put it in the Q&A and we'll pick them up after the other 2 presentations. My contact details are there, so thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand over to Martyn to talk about what you do if you need to install meters into heat networks.
Thank you very much, Will. Really interesting information there, particularly on the building exemption classes, which I didn't really understand, and also on the fact that when you install meters, the consumer can make approximately 20% savings. So that's really interesting information. Okay, I'm Martyn Farrelly, and as Odessa reminded me at the start of this webinar, I've been working in metering for many, many years. And I started in communal and district heating when there were only 4 HRU suppliers. So times have changed, because I believe there are over 60 now. As you will probably know, it has been quite a journey getting to this point, what with pandemics, publications, consultations, draft papers, delayed deadlines, and more importantly, heated debates. So what we wanted to do today, and as Will has explained everything you need to know about the cost effectiveness tool, we'd like to talk to you about what the journey is likely to look like. So, preparation. So, you've spoken to some colleagues and you've contacted some industry experts you know. Probably most of you already know Will. You've been on the government's website for guidance. You've even asked some people in other organisations like your own what they're doing. You've been on a few webinars, you've had internal teams meetings, and you've done your fair share of Googling. So you finally been to site to take all of the details you're going to need. Well, those that you can find when you're there. So your preparation is all done. It's time for the moment of truth. You've got back to the office or home. You wish you were in the office. After all, you could get someone to help you or get someone to do it for you. But then you're not in control, are you? They would be. You or they have gone on the cost effectiveness tool to fill in all the forms that you need to do: gas tariff, network efficiency, number of properties, fabric of the building, etc., etc. Make a few bits up that you couldn't find or that you didn't know, and then you've done it. It's all done. So your collective fingers hovering over the send button. You're getting nervous. Go. And there it is. True. The language they use, true or false. And you're true. You need to install meters. We must have got it wrong though. It's a 1979 block of flats. Let's check it. Let's change it. Let's go again. The moment of truth. Wow, so it is true. What now? Who do you tell? What do you do? Who's going to pay for it? When will you get your money back? Will you get your money back? How are you going to do it? How are we going to do it? Who is going to do it? Well, there's no need to panic. So create yourself a checklist so that you can make sure you're prepared for everything. So you need to know where the money's going to come from, who's going to fund it, how much is it going to cost. Get proposals from providers within the marketplace and assess the best value. What do you need and how long is it going to take? Shall you go credit billing and worry about the debt risk later? Or shall you pay a bit more upfront and have a pay-as-you-go system, minimizing any debt risk? After all, you don't have to go to the corner shop anymore to make a top-up, do you? Or what about choosing a new technology like a wireless network with the ability to interrupt the supply if customers don't pay and to switch them from credit to pay-as-you-go remotely? How are you going to communicate internally with other stakeholders within your organization? How do you communicate externally with suppliers and service providers? How do you engage with customers? And do you have a chance to improve things on the scheme for residents or for yourselves? Upgrade heating controls at the same time. Do HIU servicing. Install smart meter in-home display units. And what are the headline goals? A fully working metering system is a must, of course. But can you improve system efficiency of the network and the home? Can you install bulk meters that help you assess the efficiency of the site? Use efficiency software tools that are out in the marketplace now so you can tweak and adjust the site to make sure it's more efficient. Provide customer satisfaction through communication, the program of works, and the ongoing service you provide. And what does success look like? Fully commissioned system. And also make sure you take care to have an interoperable system so that you're never tied into any single managed service provider. Meaning you have an open protocol system and test your prospective partners to make sure that they is a true and open system that can be operated by any number of providers so that you get best value for yourselves and for your customers. So now your checklist is complete. It's time to choose the right partner. So make sure you interview your prospective partners. Check all of their credentials, challenge their proposals, analyze their case studies, seek advice and references, and make sure they have a proven track record in delivering retrofit meter installations, repairing faulty meter reading networks, and interfacing with your customers on your behalf. Always have a survey. It's crucial and is worth paying for. It's your guarantee of a successful completion of a project, and it should provide you with the ability to demand completion to your satisfaction. Agree a program with your provider, agree a time frame. As Will has alluded to, these things can take a lot longer than you would think with access issues and supply issues. So make sure that you have a time frame and whilst being flexible, it's something that you are aiming for. Agree a process in the delivery, the communication with the residents, the program of works, how you're going to communicate for appointments, and how people entering people's properties perform and take care of what they do. Agree KPIs and make sure you have a scheme health check before and after the works are done. Agree how long it will take to complete the works. Consider who is booking appointments. Will it be yourselves as a recognised and known organisation to the consumer, or will it be your service provider? Make sure you visit site during the works to check things are going to plan and seek regular updates from your provider. Set key milestones. So now, after doing all that, you're in a position to choose the right partner. At Sycous, we like to consider ourselves a heat network partner, providing anything from consultation through to consumer services. We have our own in-house billing team that provide managed services, and we have designed our own metering and billing software. We're delighted when we were approached by a local authority who had been recommended to us by one of our existing customers, who was a prominent member of the Heat Trust. And whilst I will talk in the past tense on this case study, I'd just like to assure you that the building is still alive and well, performing well, and all of the residents are happy customers. So they had a small block of 36 homes, which was built in 2009, which was before the heat network regulations were put in force. So they had a communal heating system, and each home had a heat interface unit, which provided heating and hot water. But the scheme didn't have any meters on it at all, not in the HIUs or external to the properties, except for electricity meters, of course. So once we were approached, we suggested to launch things. We held a couple of Teams meetings with representatives of the local authority and some key people within Sycous. We had a member of our project delivery team who was going to manage the whole project. We had a contract manager who would have a presence on site to make sure that everything was okay. We had a health and safety person on who would, first of all, obviously make sure everything was done correctly from a resident's perspective, but also during these difficult pandemic times would obviously have a focus on assuring residents that everything would be done as safe as possible. And we had our onboarding manager in the meetings, who was the person who would take control of the process from the project delivery through to the metering and billing service. So the first meeting we had was to discuss the client's requirements and make sure that we were meeting their expectations. And the second one was put in place so that we could agree and design a plan of action on how we were going to do this. So the first action point was we jointly with the local authority, we visited site to register some of the details and survey a property, survey the energy centre and the site as a whole. So we could get to know what the best system to put in place, whether it be hardwired, a wireless system, or something like that. We then came upon the idea of, and agreed with the local authority, that they would complete the cost effectiveness tool themselves. And what we would do was provide with some remote support through Teams on the call, which they didn't really need because we planned and discussed so much. It was really quite, and with it being a small scheme, it was quite a good pilot to operate on. So we filled in the form, and once complete, the results came back as true. So we held a project planning meeting after that to discuss a delivery program, which included communication with residents. So initially we sent out a letter to them and we invited them. We told them when we were going to be on site, and we invited them an appointment with us at a time of choosing. But there's obviously lots of other ways that you can do that by giving them an appointment and asking them to change it if it's an inconvenience. We put posters in the communal areas explaining who we are and what we were doing, explaining the benefits for all, being the landlord, being the scheme, and being the consumer, for having it. And obviously, if I'd have known earlier, I'd have put the 20% saving on your energy bill. Would have been one. We also took care to communicate our COVID compliant procedures and ensure residents that everything would be done safely, and priority would be given to their safety. Letters were dual branded, and each resident was encouraged to contact Sycous, as I said, to arrange an appointment. And any residents not engaging were sent a reminder and a follow-up telephone call, email, or text message, depending on whatever information that we held or the local authority held at the time. The residents had previously paid for their heat and hot water as part of their rent, and once we had completed the tool and it came back that we needed to install meters, we had communicated that the new meter system would charge them based upon their consumption, and therefore was transparent and fair. And reactions and feedback we got from the residents was largely very positive, and they felt happier to say that they would be billed upon their usage. The local authority had also took the decision to install a pay-as-you-go system to protect themselves against debt risk, and we explained the benefits of paying for their heat and hot water in advance, and it was received very well and positively. The programme was completed over a 2-week period, and welcome packs and heat payment cards were hand delivered by a commissioning engineer on the day of completion. And the scheme's been live for about 6 weeks now. We have, apart from the initial inquiries, we have very little need for customer services department, because one, we've got a reliable and robust system deployed on the scheme, and also, of course, the fact we give them welcome packs with frequently asked questions. We have online services, so you know, we get very little phone calls. So I suppose if you do have a true cost effectiveness tool result, and you do get funding, and you do find a delivery partner, what are the benefits of doing it? At Sycous, we're really passionate about heat networks, and we're committed to making them work for the landlord and for the. And we believe that for consumers, having metering and bills help educate people on the use of their energy and to provide a fairer way of paying for them. Also, it will create a more efficient schemes for communal and district heating systems, and landlords and heat network operators will be able to measure and monitor the patterns and their sites and how they work, how people use their energy, and make tweaks to them. It's, you know, it's well known that just 1 or 2 inefficient or incorrectly set HRUs can affect the whole network. So it will help identify those areas and improve the efficiency. And it's also to make people believe that communal heating can work for them. That I think over the years there's been quite a bit of bad press about communal heating. So things, everyone I know from myself and from the things that we do and talk about, and webinars we on, and the organisations, everyone's working really hard to make communal heating better, more efficient. So we need to prove to people that it's greener and it's cheaper, and it's to make your schemes more efficient and cost effective for the heat network operator and yourselves, because that's what we've got to do. And it's also to help make where we live greener and healthy. I don't know whether yourselves have noticed during the pandemic, when there's less traffic, everything seems to be greener and growing faster, and just seems to help the environment. Because in May 2019, the Committee on Climate Change recommended that the UK should aim to be net zero on all greenhouse gases by 2050. This would keep the UK in line with its commitments made as part of the Paris Agreement. So all of us have our part to play in achieving this. Okay, that's me done. And to those of you who have stayed with me and us, thank you very much for your time, and we hope you have found what you've heard of some. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Odessa, who's going to talk you through what your choices are when your cost effectiveness plans have been implemented.
Thank you, Martyn. I think you've asked all the questions I'm sure a lot of people are asking right now. And I'm probably going to add a few more questions to the mix about what we do after we have installed the equipment. So I'm Odessa, I'm part of the commercial team at Sycous, and I just wanted to give you an example of some of the options you may find in the market when you have your metering equipment installed. Next slide, please. So there's various solutions in the market, and you'll have just made all these decisions already. So you may have gone for an M-bus solution or a wireless M-bus, or even a newer IoT technology such as LoRaWAN. So you've ticked the box for the regulation, but as Will showed in his slide earlier on, although the duty to install meters is part of the regulation, there's also the metering and billing regulation that needs to be considered. So each resident now needs to be billed for their actual usage, so it's no longer within the service charge if they have a meter installed. And also, you've just spent all this money to put the equipment in, so you may want to consider how you can utilise this equipment for your general system monitoring as well. Next slide, please. So Sycous really want to make billing easy, and during the process of the equipment installation, it's important to consider if the billing responsibility would be adopted in-house. So if this is in-house, there's a lot of questions to consider, such as how you're going to manage it, if you have a team to manage it, how you're going to retrieve the data and how you're going to generate your statements. Or maybe you don't want it to be in-house and you want to outsource it as a billing service. And if you do outsource it, then would you want this to be a white label service, so it's still your branding, giving that uniform approach to the resident? So again, just add in a lot more questions, but that means that you can consider this really early on. So you're planning for a solution that's going to be used after the install, rather than just planning a solution to tick a box and then be forgotten about. So Sycous recognise the requirement to be flexible. So we offer multiple options through our metering and billing deck, MAB deck. It's been designed by our in-house team of developers, which is enabling us to consistently improve our portal, and that's directly from the feedback we receive. So MAB deck is now a solution to over 200 organisations, and as it says on the screen there, that's in the UK, Europe and the Middle East, means it has multiple languages. Next slide, please. So the first solution that you might want to consider is outsourcing. So if you're wanting to outsource your billing service, you're looking for a fully managed service. So for the Sycous fully managed service, we manage the data received directly from the site. So the most important part of this is making sure we have the latest meter reads, whether that's daily or every 5 minutes. And we check this using our meter data management service. So that's a complete full check on all meter reads a few weeks before the bill is raised to the resident. So this means we have the opportunity to check for any anomalies which may need a meter investigation. So the resident will receive an accurate bill rather than an estimate. Following this, any meter checks that are required are completed. The bills are then generated and distributed to your residents. They can make their payments or set up direct debits, which is collected into our ring-fenced account, sent back to you monthly, and we use a really proactive credit control procedure, giving the residents regular reminders before their payment becomes overdue. And as mentioned before, we complete this as a white label service, so it may say Sycous or it can be branded however you need, and even our support team answer the phone however and in whichever name you require. Next slide, please. So alternatively, you might have the team already and you might want to manage the billing yourself, but you just need a platform to do so. So MAB deck can also be used in-house and we'll support you with this. You can run validation reports, generate the statements, retrieve all your remote data from here. And as I said, all the training is available to do that. So you would have training from Sycous and then ongoing support. Next slide, please. Or you may just want the reads from the metering equipment and nothing else. So MAB deck reporting is really basic. You can get all your remote reading and run any validation reports that you need to, and then use that how you need to for generating the statements. Next slide, please. So we are completing these meter installations and completing the metering and billing to be compliant. But we also want to make sure the residents are receiving the best experience they can. We have to recognise that residents can't switch service providers like they may be used to on a gas boiler system. So it's really important to us that we're providing excellent customer service and enough information so they know that they're in control of their usage. So we provide the Sycous portal where residents can see their usage, previous statements, messages, updates, make payments, and view their usage in a really visual format. On this portal also residents can see the frequently asked questions, and our support team also write blogs on here. So if they've had a similar question a few times, they might write a blog about it, put it on here. Obviously, education is vital for anyone moving onto a heat network. And we also use Recite Me, which you can just see on the screenshot there. So that means we can make sure we're changing the font size, colour, language, and even being read aloud, just making sure it's accessible to everybody. Next slide, please. And of course, we have to keep it current, and there's an app for absolutely everything, including our portal. So this allows users to manage their usage whenever and wherever they are. The app can be used like the portal, so seeing their usage and previous statements and making payments. I don't really remember the last time I would open a laptop or log onto a computer to make a payment. Everything's just a few clicks on a smartphone. So we need to make sure residents can pay for their energy usage much like they pay for anything else. So if they still want to visit a store to make a payment, that's also possible to do. So on any statement they receive or on the app, they'll have a barcode which they can use for their payment. Next slide, please. We also know that a lot of residents manage their energy after work when they're just on the sofa flicking through their phone. And so it's important that we're available whenever the resident or yourself need us. So we have our standard methods of communication, such as calling our support centre or dropping us an email. Whenever you drop us an email, you'll be provided a track ticket number, just so you can monitor the process of your query. But residents can also contact us via live chat. They can find answers on our portal or even contact us on social media. And MapDeck users can also find step-by-step guides on how to complete any function they need to on MapDeck on our help.mapdeck.com website. So there's a search engine on there, and you search whatever your query is and it will come up with all the related articles. So it just means that you all are always supported, even if we're not sat in our call centre. Next slide, please. Also supported by Innovate UK, we have developed our cloud-based pay-as-you-go solution and called it Orbit, and it's coming soon. So this utilises all the new technology to enable a pay-as-you-go solution. The intelligence for this is sat within the cloud rather than a box on a wall. Obviously, by reducing the equipment, we're reducing the cost, and we don't think you should be paying more for a system which is actually designed to reduce debt. Next slide, please. And this solution is also connected to our app. So the app that you've just seen there, it works like a typical pay-as-you-go user screen that is usually in the properties, but it's obviously now fully portable. Making sure you can manage your energy usage anywhere at any time. You can even check if you're using your energy or if you need to make a top up. So the app can be used in pay-as-you-go or credit billing, so it can be changed if needed. So there's a lot to consider with ongoing management for metering and billing, and it's important that all of this is considered during the solution decision as well. So hopefully we've answered more questions than we've created, but I've seen a few questions that have popped up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to invite everybody back and we'll go through some of the questions. I can see that some have been responded to, but a few of them are really interesting, so maybe we want to discuss a few. So I think the first question I'm going to ask to Martyn, actually. I can see Will's put a really good response there, but the question's from Liz about our experience of heat cost allocators, where they've been used and their ease of management compared to a heat meter. So I can see, Will, you've put a really good response there. I just wondered if Martyn had any opinions on that also.
Sorry, could you just repeat that question, Odessa? I was frantically having technical issues with my camera.
No worries. The question is, have you got any experience of heat cost allocators where they have been used, their ease of management, the cost of install compared with heat meter installs?
We have done a couple of projects in Stevenage with heat cost allocators on, and it seems to work pretty well. We didn't perform the managed services because they decided to collect the data themselves. So we're not quite sure of the ongoing success of it, but the program of installation went really well and was quite successful.
Brilliant. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else to that, Will. I can see that you had mentioned that obviously they're more commonly used in Europe.
Not particularly. I think it is a relatively unused technology in this country. I think it's fairly standard in places like Denmark, Italy as well. And it's part of the kind of European directive of meeting this metering regulation, is that heat cost allocators are an option where it may be more expensive to put in heat metering. So not huge amounts of direct experience, but I think I was just sharing in the response there that heat cost allocators, it requires one per radiator, and then you also need to meter the incoming hot water supply. So by what we're finding in terms of install costs is adding those all together, it gets to about the same price as a heat meter. So the cost comparison is about the same. And then, yeah, there's a couple of suppliers in the UK that we can introduce you to for more information about management, the information that can be provided, and the options for doing that either in-house or as a managed service.
And do you think that heat cost allocators would be a good option? Because obviously the cost effectiveness tool is about the cost. So do you think we may start seeing more heat cost allocators because of this tool?
I think in certain circumstances, I think my headline advice is if there's not much cost differential, if you can technically do both and there's not much cost differential, I'd probably have a preference for heat meters. I think they provide additional data and functionality and more options around payment methods, so pay-as-you-go versus credits, whereas heat cost allocators don't always have a pay-as-you-go option, so that kind of debt side of things. So I think if there's just a cost comparison, I'd probably have a preference for heat metering, but there's also depends on technical feasibility and the kind of different circumstances in that building. So I think there will be more deployment, but I think it will come down to the choice of the heat network operator in that circumstance.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Will. There's also a question for you, Martyn, regarding your case study. So I can see that you're starting to type an answer, so sorry. But just talking about how many instances we've challenged residents about gaining access. I didn't know if you had anything to input on that.
Yeah, I seen Angelina's question. I didn't respond at the time because I wanted to kind of speak to everyone about it. On this particular scheme, the local authority provided a liaison officer, which really helped because we kind of, prior to going to site, we really made us visible there with the survey and everything, and branded vans and the posters and the letters and everything. And the tenant liaison officer almost, you know, in constant communication with all the residents. So when they were kind of in the communal area, for example, would know a lot of the residents by name. So it really helped us gain access and complete the works. But I do understand that, you know, on larger schemes and with more properties, there is access issues, and often we have a lot of experience on repair and retrofit projects, and we often get a bit at the end which we can't necessarily gain access to. But I don't know, Will, you've worked in local authority and housing, so what's your experience?
Yeah, I guess this is touching on barriers really, and I think that, well, there's several barriers, but I think resident engagement and access will be one of the biggest ones. I think moving from a service charge regime where people pay for their heat and hot water as part of their service charge or their rent, there will be winners and losers when it goes to individual metering billing. Hopefully everyone will reduce their consumption because they've got access to information, but where it's been an apportioned charge, you're moving to an actual charge. There'll be some people that use less than the average and some people that use more. So there'll be some people that may not be inclined to give access to install individual metering. And also from a customer journey point, some people just say, actually, I prefer to pay for it as part of my rent. It's one cost per month rather than having my rent and a utility bill for my heat and hot water. So there's a kind of number of customer journey barriers. And I think the journey of explaining why meters need to be installed, the benefits of that is really crucial. And I think it needs to be in multiple different formats and using existing channels. So kind of, I wouldn't rely solely on just a letter going out saying we're doing a meter retrofit program. I think that would get 10 to 20% of residents. There needs to be followed up with resident meetings online or in person if they're allowed, and then kind of selling the benefits, and potentially I think that will get you kind of closer to 56% uptake and adoption, and then you kind of narrow down the kind of people that aren't kind of engaged or want to uptake. And I think there's always going to be some people who are quite resistant to individual metering. So it's kind of explaining why it needs to be done, and then having a process that you can back up on. So you're kind of moving from these are the benefits to actually, no, we need to do this. This is regulation. It's incumbent on us as a heat network supplier to install metering. And therefore we need to gain access to your property. And hopefully you don't have to go there, but you can use the kind of tenancy and lease conditions, say actually you must provide access to that, but wouldn't go in with the kind of stick approach that you save that for the kind of stage 3 of engagement, but hopefully you won't have to go there too much.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really important there, and that's it's the resident engagement meetings that are done from the beginning, isn't it? And really effective communication for residents to understand what's being put into their equipment and how their day-to-day might change because of that. I think we've got time for one more question, and it's something you touched on, Will, about, of course, not everything will pass or become a true on the cost effectiveness tool, but there's still the potential that people will still want to install these metering equipment because they can see the benefit to that. I wondered if you had any experience with that so far.
So we're undertaking about just over 100 assessments so far, and we're just at the stage of presenting back the findings of what they're showing. And I think people are interested of where it's quite close to payback, but it hasn't quite passed. They're saying, oh, okay, so there's significant energy efficiency savings as per the tool. And then they've also got the conversation saying, actually, we've also got a few issues around customer satisfaction on that scheme, and the repairs and maintenance service isn't quite working in terms of picking up failing equipment. So we need to add in the kind of cost savings from improving the customer service and improving our repairs and maintenance and side of things. So they say, actually, what are those other drivers? And also we're looking at net zero carbon as an organisation. So those conversations go from purely that the tool is very finance led in terms of payback, but saying actually there's a whole host of other reasons. And what are the benefits of metering to everyone? So I think those conversations are had to those, I'd say, is the kind of the tools that are quite kind of close to fail, the ones that are really not cost effective, when it's really difficult, it's going to take a lot of money to put metering into the property. People say, okay, leave those for a few years until we absolutely have to replace the kit in that building. And at that point, maybe, but for the others in the middle, maybe let's look at them now as part of a wider program. I guess the joy of those ones is if it fails at all, you don't have to meet the 1st of September deadline, but you may want to install meters anyway as part of that proactive approach. So it gives yourself a little bit more time to be proactive and not have to kind of meet the kind of rush of the deadlines next year.
Yeah, I can see the benefit of, even if it's saying no, to be proactive instead of waiting for the day that it goes yes, and then you're on that timeline. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I bet in the 2 minutes we can squeeze one more in. So we have a question here that talks about, a lot of this is to do with social housing. So the question is how we think it would be adopted in the commercial or industrial sector. So I don't mind who would like to. It's a free-for-all.
Well, do you know what? I'll hand that over to you, Will, because you know, in the industrial sector, is it not applicable, is it?
Thanks, Martyn.
Hot potato, that one.
It is. I guess we predominantly work in the social housing sector, which is why it's been the focus of the talk. Commercial buildings that are on heat networks that aren't individually metered, that are networks that then pass the cost effectiveness tool, they will need to have metering installed, is my understanding of the tool. So if it was a shop premises, a library, a GP surgery, or anything else that takes heat from the network, and it passes the cost effectiveness tool, they'll have to have individual metering installed, is my understanding. So that's a very simplistic answer. We're starting to see more inquiries from the private rented sector and property managers. We haven't had many inquiries from the kind of purely commercial industrial sector at the moment, just to kind of, that's where we're at with it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, looking at the time, I just want to thank everyone for joining. And thank you to Will and Martyn for your presentations, and also to Tom, who you haven't seen, who's just been doing all the behind the scenes work. And if we haven't answered your question, we will definitely follow up on that soon. And if you have any other questions, our contact details are available. So just feel free to contact us. But yes, thank you very much for joining.